Imagine you're living 30,000 years ago. The sun disappeared hours ago. The only light comes from a small fire in the middle of your camp. Everyone around you is asleep. Some are wrapped in animal skins. Others lie directly on the cold ground. You can't sleep. Not because you're afraid. Because you're hungry. Really hungry. Your hunting party returned empty-handed yesterday. Today wasn't any better. Your stomach hasn't stopped growling for 2 days. Then you notice something. Just a few steps away, a hunter has hung several strips of dried meat on a wooden frame near the fire. Enough to keep someone alive for another day. You quietly look around. No one is awake. No one is watching. You slowly reach out your hand. Would you take it? Today, most of us would probably say no. Stealing is wrong. We've heard that our entire lives. But now remove everything that makes modern society modern. There are no police. No prisons, no security cameras, no locks, no supermarkets where you can buy more food tomorrow. If you don't eat tonight, you may not have another chance. Suddenly, the answer doesn't seem so simple anymore. But here's an even stranger question. If you took that meat, would ancient humans even call it stealing? Or would they see it as something completely different? To answer that, we need to step into a world where survival mattered more than almost anything else, and where one wrong decision could cost far more than a piece of meat. At first, the answer seems obvious. If you secretly take another person's food, that's stealing. Case closed, right? Not exactly. Because you've just made one very modern assumption, that the meat belongs to one person. But did it? This is where the Stone Age becomes surprisingly different from the world we know today. Imagine the hunter who killed the deer this morning. Did he spend hours tracking it? Yes. Did he risk his life bringing it down? Absolutely. So surely the meat was his. Well, not always. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have discovered something fascinating. In many small bands, a successful hunter wasn't always free to keep everything he caught. Large animals were often shared among the entire group. Children ate. The elderly ate. Even hunters who came back empty-handed often received a share. That wasn't kindness. It was survival. Because tomorrow, the lucky hunter could easily become the unlucky one. Today, you feed everyone. Tomorrow, they might save your life. So imagine you're back beside that campfire. You quietly take one piece of dried meat. Did you steal it? Or did you simply take your share? The answer depends on one thing. Who had the right to decide where that meat belonged? And that's exactly where archaeologists and anthropologists begin to disagree. Some things in the Stone Age were shared. Some things clearly weren't. The difficult part is figuring out where ancient humans drew that invisible line. Because once we know that line, we'll finally know what could actually be stolen. To answer that question, scientists didn't search for ancient thieves. Instead, they looked at the people who lived in the closest way we still know today: hunter-gatherers. Groups like the Hadza of Tanzania, the San people of southern Africa, and several indigenous Australian communities have given anthropologists a rare glimpse into how small human societies often worked. They are not living Stone Age people, but they do help us understand how humans survive without cities, governments, or supermarkets. And one discovery appears again and again. Food was often shared, but not all food. Let's go back to that deer. After a successful hunt, the fresh meat was usually divided according to rules that everyone in the group already understood. Some portions went to the hunter, some to his family, some to elders, some to everyone else. The exact rules differed from one culture to another, but one thing stayed surprisingly consistent. Sharing wasn't random. It followed social rules. That means something important. If you took meat that had already been given to someone else, people probably wouldn't see it as taking your share. They would see you breaking the rules. And in a group of only 20 or 30 people, breaking the rules was dangerous. Not because someone would call the police, but because everyone would remember. Imagine waking up the next morning. The meat is gone. Nobody has security cameras. Nobody needs fingerprints. There are only 25 people in the camp. Everyone knows who was hungry. Everyone knows who stayed awake. Everyone knows who suddenly has a full stomach. In a small tribe, secrets don't stay secret for very long. And that's where the real punishment began. Not with violence. Not at first, but with something much more valuable: trust. Once people stopped trusting you, they might stop sharing food with you. They might refuse to hunt beside you. They might leave you out of important decisions. In today's world, losing your reputation can be embarrassing. 30,000 years ago, it could become a matter of life and death, which leads to an even bigger question. If losing trust was so costly, why would anyone risk stealing in the first place? At this point, you might be thinking, so ancient humans rarely stole because everyone would find out. That certainly made stealing much harder, but it didn't make it impossible. In fact, anthropologists have found something fascinating. The people most likely to break the rules weren't always the strongest or the cruelest. They were often the most desperate. Imagine it's the middle of winter. The hunting has been terrible for weeks. Children are crying from hunger. The elderly have stopped asking for food because they already know there isn't enough. Every member of the tribe is slowly becoming weaker. Now ask yourself the same question again. Would you still refuse to steal? Suddenly, this isn't really a story about criminals anymore. It's a story about survival. And that changes everything. Modern society often treats stealing as a moral choice. But in the Stone Age, it could become a survival decision. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have repeatedly observed that food sharing tends to decrease when resources become extremely scarce. Not because people become evil, because survival forces impossible choices. When everyone is hungry, every piece of meat becomes more valuable, every mistake becomes more dangerous, and every act of generosity becomes more expensive. This helps explain something that surprises many people. Ancient humans didn't need prisons to discourage theft. Nature already provided the punishment. If nobody trusted you anymore, you might lose your hunting partners. If you lost your hunting partners, you caught less food. If you caught less food, you became weaker. And weaker people struggled to survive. Stealing didn't just risk today's meal. It risked every meal after that, which is probably why cooperation became one of humanity's greatest survival strategies. But then something happened that changed the rules completely. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans owned almost nothing. Then, almost overnight in evolutionary terms, we started owning more food than we could possibly eat. And from that moment, stealing became a very different problem. For hundreds of thousands of years, stealing wasn't humanity's biggest problem. Finding enough food was. If your tribe had almost nothing, there was almost nothing to steal. Most hunter-gatherers lived a simple life. They carried only what they needed, a few tools, some animal skins, weapons, perhaps a few personal ornaments. If they moved to a new camp tomorrow, everything had to move with them. The world changed when humans stopped moving. Around 12,000 years ago, people in different parts of the world began farming. For the first time, food didn't have to be eaten immediately. It could be stored. Grain could fill large baskets. Animals could be kept inside fences. Families could build permanent homes. And suddenly, people owned more than they could carry. That changed everything. Now imagine you're starving. Your neighbor has enough grain to feed his family for months. You have nothing. The temptation is no longer a single piece of meat beside a campfire. It's an entire storehouse of food. For perhaps the first time in history, stealing could make one family survive while another starved. As villages became larger, people no longer knew everyone personally. A reputation alone could no longer protect your belongings. Trust was still important, but it wasn't enough. So humans invented something new. Rules, punishments, eventually, laws. In a strange way, the history of theft is also the history of civilization. The more humans owned, the more they needed ways to protect what they owned. But here's the fascinating part. The desire to protect property wasn't what made civilization possible. Trust came first. Laws came later. Long before kings, long before governments, long before the first written laws, small groups of hunter-gatherers had already discovered one simple truth. Communities that trusted each other usually survived longer than communities that didn't. So, did ancient humans steal from each other? The answer is almost certainly yes. Some probably did. Humans haven't changed that much. 30,000 years ago, people could feel hunger, fear, jealousy, desperation, just like we do today. But after everything we've explored, that turns out to be the least interesting part of the story. The real surprise isn't that some people stole. The real surprise is that most of the time, human societies couldn't afford for stealing to become normal. Imagine living in a world where nobody trusted anyone. Every hunter hides his food. Every family sleeps with one eye open. Nobody shares. Nobody helps when someone gets injured. Nobody believes anyone's promises. How long would that tribe survive? Probably not very long. Now imagine another tribe. Hunters share their catch. People respect one another's tools. Children are fed even when they can't contribute. The elderly are cared for after they can no longer hunt. Trust spreads. Cooperation grows. Which tribe do you think leaves behind more children? Which tribe survives the hardest winters? Which tribe eventually spreads across the world? The answer may explain why humans became one of the most successful species on Earth. Not because we never stole, not because we were naturally kinder than every other animal, but because we discovered something even more valuable than food, that a trusted partner is worth more than a stolen meal. In the end, the greatest invention of early humans wasn't the spear, or fire, or even agriculture. It was the invisible agreement that allowed complete strangers to work together. Without that agreement, there would be no villages, no cities, no civilizations, and no modern world. So the next time you leave your phone on a cafe table for just a moment, or trust a delivery driver to bring your package, or lend something valuable to a friend, remember, those everyday moments aren't just protected by laws. They're built on a habit that may have started around a campfire tens of thousands of years ago. A habit of believing that cooperation is usually worth more than taking what isn't yours. Because in the story of humanity, stealing may have always existed. But trust changed the world. So, what about you? If you were starving in the Stone Age, would you have taken that piece of meat? Be honest. Nobody's calling the Stone Age police. Let me know in the comments. And if you're curious about how our ancestors survived, suffered, and somehow built the world we live in today, subscribe and join us on the next journey. Just try not to steal the last piece of meat before then.